On March 7, 1944, 12,000 feet above Brandenburg, Oberleutnant Wilhelm Hoffmann witnessed something no German pilot had ever seen before. 400 American bombers stretched across the horizon like a plague of steel locusts, but this time, they weren't alone. And what Hoffmann discovered in the next few minutes would shatter years of German air combat doctrine forever. The morning sky over central Germany vibrated with the distant thunder of aircraft. Hoffmann, a veteran of countless engagements, banked his Messerschmitt Bf 109 through a thin layer of cloud. His fuel tanks were full, his nerves steady. He had done this routine 100 times: spot the bomber stream, strike fast, dive away before the American escorts ran out of fuel. For 3 long years, that pattern had never changed. The Americans came deep into German airspace, dropped their bombs, then turned for home. Their escorts, P-47 Thunderbolts, or early Spitfires, simply couldn't stay long. By the time the bomber formations reached Berlin or Hanover, the fighters would peel off, low on fuel, leaving the heavy bombers exposed. Fuel ruled the battlefield. Mathematics ruled survival, and Hoffmann knew the math well. P-51 Mustangs, those sleek American machines with their bubble canopies and bright nose art, were rumored to be better, but German pilots laughed at the idea that they could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. At the briefing earlier that week, Major Klaus Brecht Schneider mocked the reports. 5-hour missions? Impossible, he'd scoffed. My grandmother could fly 5 hours in a glider. The Mustang is just a polished Spitfire with bigger tanks. They'll turn back at Dummer Lake like they always do. German intelligence insisted the Americans were bluffing. No fighter in history had achieved such range. Their own Bf 109s and FW 190s could barely manage a fraction of that distance even with drop tanks. Fuel, or the lack of it, had always been the Luftwaffe's invisible ally. But as Hoffmann prepared his attack run on a lagging B-17, something felt wrong. His radio crackled. Feldwebel Ernst Müller shouted from below, "Kleine Freunde approaching from the west. They're not breaking off." At first Hoffmann believed he'd misheard. Escort fighters always turned back. Always. But a glance west sent a chill down his spine. Through the morning haze, silhouettes emerged. The unmistakable wings of P-51 slicing through the sky, still with the bombers, still escorting them, still full of fuel. That was impossible. To understand why Hoffmann's world was collapsing, we jump back to a converted furniture factory in Inglewood, California, 3 years earlier. In April 1940, Britain was desperate. They needed fighters fast, faster than any company had ever built one. North American Aviation stepped forward with a bold promise, a prototype in 120 days. Most companies took at least 2 years. Edgar Schmid, chief designer, barely slept. Engineers worked around the clock. Drafting tables glowed under lamps at all hours. On October 26, 1940, just 117 days later, the NA-73X took flight. The first Mustangs were decent, not exceptional. Their Allison engines performed well at low altitude, but choked above 15,000 feet. The British used them for reconnaissance and ground attack, nothing special. But then came one man who saw what everyone else missed. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker took a Mustang for a spin. What he felt stunned him. The airframe, the laminar flow wing, the aerodynamic purity was extraordinary, fast, efficient, ahead of its time, but the Allison engine was holding it back. Harker wrote a memo that effectively rewrote aviation history. Marry this airframe to the Merlin engine, and you will have the best fighter in the world. The British listened. The Americans listened. And 6 months later, on November 30, 1942, the first Merlin-powered Mustang took to the air. The transformation was breathtaking. Speed 390 mph drew 440 mph, ceiling 30,000 foot, and most importantly, fuel consumption plummeted. A cable from Lothair Call, Thomas Hitchcock to Washington practically vibrated with excitement. New Mustang with Merlin engine consumes only 43 gallons per hour at 25,000 feet, 300 mph cruise. This changes everything. The mathematics of combat had shifted. A P-51D carried 2069 gallons internally, 2 Ahimwin-prone and 10-gallon drop tanks. Cruising at 43 gallons per hour, a Mustang could theoretically fly over 2,000 miles. Berlin from England, only 750 miles. The Mustang could go there, fight hard for half an hour, and return with fuel to spare. This wasn't just a fighter, it was a long-range predator. Hoffmann began his dive on the bombers, expecting the usual hit and run. But as he lined up his shot, Müller screamed again, "Mustangs! They're following us down!" That phrase had never been spoken in a German cockpit before. American escorts never chased German fighters during their attack runs. They couldn't, not without running out of fuel. But Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group had been waiting for this moment. His P-51B Shangri-La had taken off hours earlier. He still had 4 hours of fuel left. When he saw the 109s diving on the bombers, he didn't hesitate. Horseback leader, horseback 1. Bandits, 2 o'clock low, going down. Gentile shoved his throttle into war emergency power. The Merlin howled. Fuel consumption tripled. In any other fighter, this would be suicidal. In the Mustang, it was Tuesday. For years, German pilots had mastered the art of energy fighting. Altitude meant potential energy. Speed meant life. They would climb high, dive through the bomber formation, shoot, escape before the escorts reacted. But the Mustangs weren't conserving energy. They were spending it freely, because they had the fuel to do so. Hoffman glanced back over his shoulder. The Mustang wasn't peeling away. It was gaining. For the first time in his career, he realized he could not outrun his enemy. Surviving documents from German pilots in early 1944 read like confessions of disbelief. Hauptmann Friedrich Beck wrote, "The new American fighters pursue us to very low altitudes and great distances. They seem to have unlimited fuel." Major Gunther Specht of JG-11 lamented, "They circle our airfields waiting for us. We are being hunted in our own airspace." The Luftwaffe had structured its entire defense strategy around the escorts turning back. The Mustang had closed that window, then welded it shut. In January 1944, before Mustangs became widespread, the U.S. 8th Air Force lost 377 heavy bombers. By May, with Mustangs escorting most missions, losses dropped to 148. German fighter losses told the opposite story. January, 307 fighters lost. May, 432 fighters lost. Skill alone couldn't save the Luftwaffe anymore. The Americans had endurance. They had numbers. They had time. Colonel Hubert Zemke changed everything with a simple order. Forget the bombers. Your job is to clear the skies. Hunt them. Chase them. Use your fuel. Use your advantage. Mustangs began roaming freely across the Reich. They strafed airfields, hit rail lines, destroyed convoys, caught German fighters during takeoff and landing. One pilot returned with tree branches jammed in his air scoop. He'd been flying so low during a strafing run. The Americans weren't just defending anymore. They were dominating. German fighters, even with drop tanks, could not match Mustang range. A Bf-109G burned 70 gallons per hour. An FW-190 even more. Fuel shortages became catastrophic. Some pilots were limited to 1 sortie per day, sometimes none. Meanwhile, American training schools churned out 3,000 new pilots per month. General Adolf Galland later admitted, "The Mustang was decisive not because it was better, though it was good, but because it was everywhere. Even training bases deep in Czechoslovakia were under attack. There was no safety, not anywhere." By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was drowning. Kill ratios flipped brutally. In 1943, Germany claimed 3 Allied aircraft for every loss. By late 1944, the Mustang achieved 6 German kills for every Mustang lost. Mustang pilots like George Preddy, John Meyer, and Don Gentile became legends. They weren't just escorting, they were hunting. Operation Jackpot targeted training flights specifically. On May 29, 1944, Mustangs shot down 12 student pilots in 4 minutes. Their instructors could only watch. Oberfeldwebel Siegfried Bethke recalled, "It was not combat, it was execution." By 1945, the situation was hopeless. Pilots took off knowing they were already outnumbered 5-1. Luftwaffe doctrine shifted to ramming attacks, a last desperate measure. Even then, Mustangs intercepted many before they reached the bombers. Lieutenant Oscar Bush wrote to his wife, "The Americans own the sky. We take off in darkness and land in darkness." Last week Weber was shot down in the landing pattern. The American followed him to the ground. Germany had lost not just air superiority, it had lost the war in the air. Wilhelm Hoffmann survived the war. In a 1985 interview, he reflected on that fateful March day. "We trained for short, sharp engagements. The Mustang pilots fought like they had all day, because they did. When I finally shot one down in January 1945, I glided 10 kilometers home on empty tanks. As I climbed out of my cockpit, another Mustang strafed the field, waiting for the perfect moment. That was when I understood. We were prey. The equation had changed. Distance, fuel, time, endurance. A new mathematics of war had emerged, and Germany could no longer solve it. The P-51 Mustang didn't win through acrobatics, though it could turn and climb with the best. It won through endurance, through range, through the simple but brutal truth that the side that can show up the most wins. Modern fighters like the F-22 Raptor are engineering marvels, yet still struggle with the same ancient enemy: fuel, distance, time on station. The Mustang, built with slide rules and intuition, conquered those limits 80 years ago. In the end, air superiority does not belong to the best dogfighter. It belongs to the fighter that can be everywhere, for longer, in numbers that matter. The Mustang proved that logistics isn't part of war, it is war. Fade out as engines roar one last time. And on March 7, 1944, high above a burning Germany, the hunters became the hunted.